Everyone is trying to launch an online course, but very few people are doing it successfully. It's estimated to be a $325 billion industry by 2025. And I know two people that have actually done it successfully. Welcome, Kamille, and this other guy that I think I know.
Yeah, hi there.
Yeah, hey, Michael. Kamille.
Yes.
Can you just start telling us a bit about your background and experience and kind of what is everything that led up to Stay Booked, which, that's the name of the course, but you guys will get into it more. But what it took to find, co-found Stay Booked with Michael?
Yeah. So a few years ago, I bought a vacation rental property, and I launched it, and it was doing really well. It was kind of during those, inflated pandemic numbers, and it was smashing it. And, then things kind of started to slow down a bit. There was the Airbnb bust and the economy and uncertainty. And so the numbers were dipping. And I was also getting pretty frustrated with the big OTAs like Airbnb and Vrbo for so many reasons, including just the stress and all the power is given to the guests and not to the host. And there were some issues there, but yeah, bookings were slowing down. And I thought, what can I do? Because I'm giving all of the power to Airbnb right now. All of the marketing is what they're doing. I felt like I was sitting on my hands and not doing anything. So I thought I need to turn to social media right now. And I started a profile for my property and started creating content. I just kind of started going. First, I was just posting my Airbnb listing photos and just trying things out, a lot of trial and error, but it started going very well. And I put up my own direct booking site, which I built, and I started getting direct bookings, and it changed everything for me. And I gained 10,000 followers in about 8 months, and it's above that now. But it changed everything for me as far as my numbers, my bookings, and my direct bookings, and I took all the power back into my own hands. And people started coming to me and saying, "Hey, could you let me know how you did this, or could you teach me something? Could I have a phone call?" And I started noticing that there was this gap. And Michael and I had been talking this whole time, and people were saying, "Hey, where can I take a course on this too? Do you have a course on this? Can you teach about this?" And we thought, well, we should probably start a business about this because it's a growing industry. There's a gap in the vacation rental industry around this because it's so new that people are starting to have to do this, especially because there's such high inventory now. The competition is fiercer. You need to do more things to stand out. You have to do your own marketing and go above and beyond just what the OTAs are doing for you. So that's when we decided to start Stay Booked, where we can help people learn these same tools and actually give this perfectly outlined course step by step on exactly how to do it with exactly the way that I did it.
And add a couple of things to that too. So when Kamille got into her property, I got into my property similar time. She had a head start on hers. And again, we were looking at, do we want to get into other properties? But then with some of the things in the market and everything that was going there, it's like, oh, okay, how do we first look to maximize our own? And she went full speed ahead and really leveraging, especially, Instagram. And, at that time, I had been working on the 30-day career accelerator program, but the pace that I was moving at on that program had been a little bit slower as perfection had in many ways become, the enemy of progress. So that was one of the things, like, as we started talking about this, is like how to quickly validate this. And Kamille was obviously already getting, those queries from people who were wanting to learn a little bit more. But that was sort of the one where it's like, oh, okay, there's something here. People are asking for it. How can we actually go about testing and validating, not only the course, just to clarify, we talked course, but ultimately we built out a program that's, meant to also include a coaching component to it as well. So, which is maybe different than just a course that's only, content somebody's just consuming, but ours is trying to have that, the templates, everything else to really help the short-term rental marketing space and individuals be able to hopefully increase their bookings, assuming they, put in the time and effort, because that's definitely something that is required in this space.
Michael, you touched on 30-day course creator. I'm obviously very familiar with that one since I've been there with you trying to build it from day one. And like you mentioned, it's been a slow progress because you've changed your strategy. You've pivoted. You've gone from how long should it be to should it be shorter? What's my pricing strategy? And then recording all, and it's very, very in depth. And I've seen all the modules. And then you showed me Stay Booked, and I was like, holy crap, there's a lot here too. So what was the difference? Why has 30-Day Accelerator taking you 18 months and you're close to launching? While I feel like I heard Stay Booked, and then 30 days from that, you guys are live. Like, what was the difference?
Well, to be fully honest, when you mentioned even 18 months, let's be frank, I think I started the first iteration, which I did launch 8 years ago. And then ended up, selling some of those, but then got distracted back into my full-time job at the time. And then eventually, as left corporate America, that's when it's like, okay, let's go at this again and let's refactor it, because I looked back at the original one and I'm like, it was, not all that great. So I think the core difference is a whole lot of overthinking and just not really prioritizing it in the way that I know I should around a deadline. Like, this is the launch date. And that's something that Kamille and I did here with Stay Booked, is we said, you know what, let's move forward to launch. And like literally at the time, like we ended up in a program that we were in where we had met, which basically teaches short-term rental hosts. I mean, it was our previous guest, Rob Abasolo, was on here's program. That's where we met. We were in the mastermind, together. And, as we were in that group, we said, well, you know what, let's see if Kamille offered a class in there on like a 1 hour, teaching people what she did, kind of high level process of hers. And let's see what the results are. And then with that, let's, capture some emails if we can by giving them a checklist of this. And that's exactly what happened. So between that, and then between also us poking around in some like other Facebook channels where people were trying to learn more about this, we basically created enough interest in it. In fact, Kamille got herself banned from a couple of places because she went in there trying to share, hey, happy to do this tutorial for you, which truly at the time, I mean, there was nothing we were fully selling at the end of it. We just wanted to validate and see if there was something there. But with that, some groups did not like that. But in the case of the other, there was enough people that came through. They're not a huge number of people at first, but enough for us to say, okay, there's interest in this thing. And then we basically, after a couple of those calls, ended up saying, let's move forward and actually offer people like a package that we didn't even have yet, basically saying, here's what we think would be in the program. Hey, would you be interested in this program? And then offered it not at a really high price, but at a price that was would feel like a no-brainer, so we could build it as we went along. And we literally built the course while we were basically preparing it. Like the week before, I mean, maybe we were fortunate on a few where we were 2 weeks ahead, but crafting it all, building out the presentation, and then just doing it live like that. And I think that's a huge difference between that and 30-Day Career Accelerator. Again, I wanted to make so much of it perfect. And I had coaching clients in that space that probably also, every time I'd let that inform, but it's like, you don't get to the scale that you can get with like what we're doing now, where we rolled it out. We've already had feedback from the first, cohort. And then based on that feedback, we're implementing it, refactoring it now for a relaunch that we're targeting for mid-September. And we also were able to go back to the original cohort and offer ongoing coaching and be able to sell that, back to the cohort as well, based on the support and stuff we're able to provide. So all of that, to summarize, it was just a matter of not overthinking it, picking a date, moving forward, figuring out literally just in the nick of time of what we did, because otherwise Parkinson's law and procrastination could kick in, and you could take as long as you have, which could be your entire life, to get it done, which is why I think so many people who want to do these never actually make it to market.
I think listening to the contrast between the two, it's very interesting. I think it's definitely a lesson there they should learn. Stop overthinking and just do it. And that's how you learn actually what works and what doesn't, versus spinning it in your head, thinking what works. And, talking about that pricing, 30-Day Accelerator, I think you've gone like all over the place with pricing.
Oh yeah.
So what made you guys, I think, I'll ask Kamille this one. What made you guys decide on pricing fairly quickly and to roll with it? Was there some kind of science behind it, or was it just, let me feel this out? Or was it, you know what, in order to cover our costs, this is what it needs to be. We're just going to roll with it.
It was sort of a combination of all three. I think, we did a little research on what other people were pricing things at, and we knew this was a beta program, a beta launch, where we wanted to learn as much from them as they were learning from us, and we wanted it to move quickly. So I think with those three things considered, we came up with a price, and it turned out to be a good price. I think anyone who who we kind of warmed up on the idea ended up buying it. And as far as moving forward, what we're going to price it for in September, there is a little more nuanced than what we did launching the beta program. And I think a lot of it with launching the course, it was a very ready, fire, aim process. And there's something I really like about that. I did it also with my short-term rental. Not to say that I don't think things through. I'm a little bit high risk, I would say, but not reckless high risk. But I do like to just kind of go for things and just say, I've committed myself, I'm doing this, so now I really have to do it, right? It's like jumping without the rope, the whole analogy there. So there was something, and it makes it kind of exciting too. And then you have this pressure, which pressure makes diamonds, right? We all kind of need that pressure. And then it just made it happen. So yeah, the pricing was a combination of three things, but we didn't spend too much time on it. We just kind of, picked it and moved forward.
And I think as we look at this next one, we also, because we've gone back and forth a couple of times on that pricing, and Kamille, at times like, I think we can, push it a little bit more, and there is that fine balance, because you could look back at what we did with the first launch, and arguably because we basically got yeses from almost everybody that we had engaged with on that, you could argue and say the price was probably a little too low. But at the same time, that was what we needed, I think, to really just get moving, get started. Because if we would have probably gone into it and actually got too many no's at first, then there's also a chance that, just the energy and everything else around it wouldn't have been there. But I think in our next iteration too, we're looking at a few different flavors. The first one, we just really had one option for people to buy into. The next one, we'll have mastermind option as well as a group coaching component to it. And then we may sell one more component that's kind of more of a downsell that's like, okay, well, if you don't want any of that support and stuff, then here you go. But we hesitate a little bit on that because obviously another core thing, especially as a young business, is we want to make sure that we are really seeing this. Not just a young business. It's just we want to see people have a success. But it's even more important as a young business because the testimonials, reviews, and other things are going to help to continue to be a foundation that we build a business on. And that was, by the way, another key reason why we wanted to launch the beta program, is to come out with those, because we knew that those paired with our next offer is going to make it easier for us to sell the program, because people are going to be able to actually see people who went through and had a level of success with it.
You guys mentioned how you spoke with people around, what the offer is. This time go around, as you scale, you can't rely on conversation only. So how are you going about your marketing messaging and your copy? Like, what's that process like to convey what this is about, and whether you're going to have a sales funnel or not?
A couple things, maybe one of them here, I'll hand off to Kamille in a second around, but one of the things that we purposely did somewhere around the same time that we were launching the initial beta program, is build out an Instagram component to it. So in a second, maybe she could go into a little bit of that, kind of the strategy there, but that will be one of the ways that we're looking to, bring people in, like a better way to put it, to our funnel. And then, from there, obviously between the email and the engagement we have, which we're starting to ramp that up a little bit more as well, and make sure there's at least an email going out each week, kind of, keeping in the terms of marketing of warm, leads versus cold. And then, from there, we are going to test and do some different ads and things like that, which we've already thought of some creative on. And we may engage a little bit of like cold outreach help, but we're a little on the fence exactly how deep down that pathway will go. I think I can speak for both of us when I say neither one of us are exactly huge fans of getting on those sales calls, but we also know that based on the size and where we're at now, a little bit of that is required. And the way that we've set up the program and the business in general too is because Kamille's success with her own property, she ultimately is the brand, the face, the person that people look towards. And our content is trying to lead a little bit that way because we know the trust is there that's helpful. And I'm just not a trustworthy looking guy. No, it's just the nature of she's done this. So that's where we've landed. And in fact, in the future, we'll have to figure out the right balance where how I might show up or not show up in some of that stuff. The program itself, we're both in there helping people. Kamille obviously has this great background from what she's done within Instagram. I have some experience when it comes to some of the stuff we've done around email marketing. Other areas we're still playing with, like ads. We're trying to really understand the ads component now because that's going to be something else that we have in ours. But Kamille, did you want to touch on just a little bit of the Instagram kind of strategy and why that's such an important component for the space we're in?
Yeah, I think it's, well, not just for the space we're in for sure, but it's really important for any business these days. Instagram, people are just on there and you want to find them and try to stop the scroll and get their attention and talk about what they didn't know they needed. But for us specifically, I would say almost all of our potential clients or potential customers are on Instagram because part of what we're teaching is how to grow your property on Instagram. So there are a lot of people who they've started that Instagram account for their property, but they're just not seeing the numbers. So we're trying to target those people, capture that audience, and build that trust on that platform. And so we're doing we're not doing so much selling on Instagram, but our strategy there is more so giving away a lot of free value, giving a lot of advice, templates, resources, trying to build the email list there and building that trust. And then when it comes time for the course, might do a lead up there, but also definitely the ads, the Instagram and Facebook ads will come in at that point. Might not even be in our actual feed, but more so just being fed as ads so that we're not doing too much selling there and more so doing the selling in the Instagram stories because you can include links and it's where you do your selling on Instagram is in the stories.
And you want to touch on mini chat too and how we've leveraged that?
Yes, ManyChat. It's a great tool. Pretty much, I mean, anyone who's anyone on Instagram right now is using ManyChat. So the old way to do it was to say, hey, check out the link in my bio to learn more about my blank course, whatever product. But now it's comment this word below and I will DM you my free this or a link to this. And this program, ManyChat, they set up an automation so that you choose the word, the post, you pick a word, a keyword, and anytime someone comments that on that post, it automatically DMs them whatever link or document you want to give to them. So it's a really powerful tool because it just cuts the number of steps it takes. It's just so easy to just comment, one word, and then you automatically get it, and then you're in their DMs. And you started that conversation and you can discuss things further there. So it's a powerful tool.
So then, we have the growing email list that will obviously help us as we then reach out and market as well. So I think between, those core areas that should help. Sure, we also have a website, at staybooked.net that we set up as just hey, want to join the list, but we haven't really been doing a lot around that just yet. So in the future, like one of the things we want to do is build that out a little bit more and just the funnel of freebies, or like a better way to put it, so that when people are looking for resources, we're showing up even a lot more in some of the organic search and things like that as well. And I will say that one of the things I want to do longer term, we've just been slammed with what we have to get through here because just the refactoring has been a beast for the program in general. But I do think that because so much of it is, again, how much value we can add and how much we can help people, which then in turn, builds the trust and then ultimately, theoretically leads to the sales. I do think that, we do have a future in YouTube in some sort of a fashion, even if it is just talking through at a higher level. Like Instagram, you hit kind of a time limit of what people are going there to watch, kind of like TikTok, people aren't necessarily looking at the longer form. Yet the way that a lot of us learn, I think our audience learn, and I'll admit the way that I definitely learn is, sure, I'll get bite-sized from Instagram and that's good, but when I want to get more in depth on something or more steps, then YouTube is a place for that. So I do think that there's a future for us where we'll probably do more just talking head style, where we're running through and kind of talking about how to do things as well. And I think that will play in our third cohort launch or something like that, a bigger role.
So, I mean, you guys mentioned mini chats. Obviously, YouTube is not a tool, but it is a tool. But as you started to launch this business, what's the tool set, like the breadth of tools that you guys are using to manage the business, from marketing, from payment collection to actually like operations of it, to, sending content to people? Like, what's the breadth of the tools that you guys are using?
So yeah, I guess with any new business, there's always kind of at least a small suite of tools that you're using to get things moving. And right now we're using Stan Store for the link in our bio on Instagram. So basically it's a platform where you have a link in your bio, and they click on it and it outlines your products that you're trying to sell, whether it be your one-on-one coaching or signing up your mailing list or sending someone a Loom or selling your course. So you can lay it all out right there very easily. It's almost like putting a little funnel right there in the link in your bio. and I was just kind of displaying all of your products in a pretty way too. You can brand it and it looks really customized and nice. So Stan Store is one that we're using. And what else? I mean, there's MailChimp, of course, for email marketing.
Yeah, Go High Level is where we're, pivoting more of our email into the future, and it's what the course website itself is built on, and it's what we're going to build out our funnels in. At least that's the plan that we have now. And then good old Google Drive, for where we're storing in these, especially because that's one thing too I don't think we mentioned. So Kamille lives in France, I live in northern Idaho. So while we did finally get to meet once about a month or so ago when she happened to be out in Seattle area, it's not something that being far away like this is not super easy. Art and you and I, when we got to know each other, obviously we worked years together at the same company. And yeah, so for Kamille and I, this is kind of it. So we have to be able to collaborate in between Slack and between the Google Drive. Those ones are critical. But something else I want to mention real quick about Stan, as she said that when we first started all this too, and this is again the idea of just speed and moving forward, not overthinking it, is so easy for people to get lost in the idea of, okay, how should I set this company up? How do I go about, the legalities, all those sort of things? Well, when we first started pitching this, there was no real state-book company at the time. Now there's an LLC around it. There was also no way to accept payments when we first said to customers, hey, would you be interested in this? All of a sudden we got the yeses back, and then it's like, oh, let's figure out how we accept the payment. But I think that's key, because again, I think instead, like, somebody could get lost in it, and while this may not be the exact example today, it always reminds me of the business card approach, where people want to get that perfect and they're working on that until they actually really, dive in. And I think that again was super important here, is just diving in. And I think that's where a partnership in general can be valuable, is you get out of your own head a little bit more, because one person brings something else up, the other one's like, well, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? And I think that's where, again, this has worked well, because then you're building off the energy, and that helps to be like, yeah, and then this, and then that, instead of like stopping it, like at least the voices in my head often want to get in the way of.
I mean, I can definitely relate, especially knowing you for as long as I know. My approach has always been kind of like the Toyota just-in-time method. It's like, I don't need to learn about that until I actually need to use it. Then I'll learn about it, and that way it sticks. Versus, Michael and I have always been avid readers, and yeah, we consume a lot of content. But sometimes it's just for that moment, and then it just goes away. But then when you actually need to execute something and you need to learn something, at that moment learning it, you're like, aha, now I get it. And to me, that's been the most effective way, for this podcast and, just learning YouTube. It was a very similar story to you guys, where we didn't overthink it. We're like, let's do it. We didn't have a name for it, nothing. We just started. And then slowly we're like, okay, so we need to now learn this. Let's do it. Okay, next step. So I can definitely understand and relate to you guys' stories as well. You guys were touching on marketing and branding just a few minutes ago. how'd you guys approach that? Like what, sometimes people can get really stuck in that process where they want the nice colors and the perfect logo. Like what made you decide, okay, this is the branding and we're going to go with it?
I think with branding especially, it's something that you can think way too much into, but it's almost just not worth it, because I don't think I've ever branded anything and never wanted to go change it later. I mean, no matter what amount of money I've spent on it or who I use, it's like you do it and you love it for like a couple months, and then you look back at it and you're like, ugh, I don't know, I don't really like that logo. Oh, those colors, because you'll see someone else's, right? Grass is always greener, and you're like, oh, that looks really cool. And I think unless you're spending, 10 grand on professional logo design and, whole branding kit and everything, you have to just, do a little bit of research, get the logo made. We did hire, someone to create a logo. It's the same person that did the logo for my property. And he's very fast and he did a good job. And we kind of picked colors based on our industry. A little bit of color psychology went into considering the color palette. But even now, you look back and you're thinking, oh, I wish it was different, or you start second guessing everything. But in the end, you have to know that it's not so much about the branding as long as it's sort of on point, and it's not too far off as far as colors and the industry that you're in. I think that you just kind of go for it there too. And there are so many tools these days. Like AI is just opening up this whole suite of tools, and you don't even need to be a graphic designer anymore to, to kind of experiment and create your own logos and branding. So yeah, that's how we did our branding, and I'm happy with it, definitely. But I'm just one of those that always looks back a couple of months later and is thinking, oh, it could be this, it could be that, and somebody's like us to be like, okay, we're not going to rebrand, okay, we just launched,
Yeah.
so just
And I think it's funny though, because I do think that there is something that happens, and this almost goes back to the business card thing again too, where like people are waiting because that's one of the things they want on their business cards, that logo. And then, but the minute you finish it, then all of a sudden you're ready and you're like, I don't know, I'll tweak it some more. And like, you can keep tweaking these things forever. And eventually it's kind of like even names, you can go back and forth on names forever. And it's like, and I don't want to say that it definitely matters, but usually what you have initially, get some feedback from a few people, and, that you're there. But I think, Kamille does look at the sensibilities like around some of this too. And obviously we lean more into the way she thinks about some of that when it comes to like also the social media, because our clients tend to be more female. That's what in short-term rentals in general, it's also one of those things that often occurs, when anybody selecting an Airbnb as well. But there's just, because of that, and because there's also others in the space already, several men and stuff like that. So we have this talk about the masculine versus feminine look, even as we put together our videos now. So there is that component that's important, and I've always got to be careful with my opinion on there and be like, in the end, default Kamille, or some cases I'll bring in, my wife's point of view, even when Camille's like on the fence. It's like, well, let's see what, she thinks as well. But the abandoning is, yes, it is true. Kamille did recently say, should we change it again? It's like, okay, no, we're good for now. But here's probably why I think a little less of that. When it came to the creation of that, she did work directly on it. Sure, I had a point of view here or there, but I probably am not thinking about it in that same way that she does, of like, okay, should it be changing like that? Because like most of the outsiders are of a logo, very few of us ever actually look at a logo and be like, they should really change that. Like whoever looks at Starbucks, which, on its own is a complicated logo or other, but eventually the companies over time will change those. If you go back and look at every popular logo over the years, they will do it. But I think it is usually on like a cycle of, maybe in 5 years or 2 years, we'll redo that. But yeah, you just got to let it go. It's one more of those things, good enough, and move on.
It was recently that I saw, was it an article or video, something on this, where it showed logo design from like the 1800s to now. And back then, because of the lack of tools, getting something to look complex was desirable because it showed a lot of thought and expertise and craftsmanship went into it. As tools evolve and all the design kind of taste has gone through this more minimalistic area, logos evolved very minimalist, and it went from a 3D kind of look to now flat, because that's the kind of the norm now. So if you look at Coca-Cola, some of the brands from the way back then, if you look at the evolution of their logos, they've become very simple and flat. Now, maybe it reverses and then it starts going back.
I have to take a look at that. I'll say too, I think another thing with the logo that we had to keep in mind in creating it is because Instagram is the place where we're mainly marketing. See, I mean, there is a little bit of difference of the space and how you can display that. Now, granted, we have different iterations of our logo, and that's, again, something that everybody should always think about, because sometimes the logo is going to be on a dark background, sometimes the logo is going to be on a lighter background, and sometimes you're going to have space to spell out more. Sometimes people include a little slogan or something along with it. But we did have to think about it in terms of how more people were going to see it and try to design something with that.
I'm curious what you guys think about this. So in kind of the course creation or knowledge business, so much of the face of the company becomes the people that are actually doing a lot of the teaching and all the content creation, where the logo doesn't even matter. Like when I think about Tony Robbins, I have no idea what his logo looks like.
Yeah.
But if you think Tony Robbins' company, boom, I know exactly what that is.
And you picture him.
I picture him. Yeah, he's the logo in my head.
Voice, yeah.
So how do you guys consider that? And if not, how do you, as you guys grow and people start knowing State Book, not as the State Book logo, but as Michael and Kamille, how you guys stay in front of this and constantly present your face everywhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because at first I had some hesitations about that, and Michael was very, encouraging and saying, what have we got to lose? And I think it's important, and which he's right. It's important for building trust. I think that when there are companies that have no face, you can still have success for sure, but it doesn't have that personal touch. You don't feel like you're talking to a person. You feel like, especially, in today's age, you feel like you could just be, talking to AI the whole time. Like it's just run by, a computer, and you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So I think it does help to build that trust when there's a person talking to you. And it's, especially in our case too, where part of what we're teaching is something that we've done, something that, I did with my property and building the audience. And there are so many courses out there now. In every industry, and people can just make things up, or they haven't even done it. And they're like, I just made a course about it. And you're like, how do you know? And not to say that couldn't work, but I think that people are getting a little smarter about that. And they're really seeking out the courses where someone has done it, because you obviously you're teaching what you've already done. So, being in front of the camera, it's a strange thing sometimes. It takes some getting used to, and I think that just one thing we do want to think about for the future of the company is, if we ever wanted to pass the company off at some point, we'd need to kind of evolve and make it not so reliant on our faces, so that it could be run by someone else if it went in that direction. Of course, there's so many ifs, ands about that as far as, if it would expand or change or so. But that's one thing to consider.
And I think with that, I think it's a good point there, and it's balance we've tried to find too, because I've never had an issue going from 0 to Fortune 500 company in my own head, like with the idea of what something can become and how big it can be. Because it's exciting. And, in those scenarios, because Kamille and I have the conversation too about, okay, yeah, well, obviously, yeah, when a company's not relying on a full-on face brand, it is easier when you might think about how it resells it online. But the reality is, then we also realize is at this stage of a company, trust is really what you have, and trust is more likely to happen with a human than it is going to be with, it doesn't happen, as you pointed out, art and with logo and stuff like that. And in fact, there's also been this question we've had at times with how we even have stuff on Instagram and others. It's like, well, how much should we be leaning even more into, Kamille's mug, for lack of a better way to put it. And not me though at this time purposely, because again, we also don't want to spread that out too much and confuse it too much with the audience, because that's not how we're building it out. And it is on her success with her own, property. Granted, we've been implementing many of these things within our own property, and we're slowly but surely, growing up, and then that'll allow us to introduce more of that later. But I think for right now, the idea is we do need to focus on the individual and the trust, because that's what's going to get people to buy. And then we'll decide down the line what that looks like and what it means for some eventual, exit or whatever that looks like. But we've got a lot of potential within this company. And for all we know, it's going to, find us pivoting to even doing more. Like maybe people are like, we really want your help doing this. And maybe then there's partnerships with bigger properties or resorts or other things like that. Like it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. And that's, I think, something we've tried to say somewhat flexible too, is not assuming as we go into this, we know everything or that we know exactly where it's going to end up. But we do keep trying to follow what we're hearing from our customers and some of our own problems being in this space. And that's a big benefit of us having a property, because we know exactly what type of things we're going to run into there and what people are facing.
Your core audience or your customer is people with existing properties in the vacation rental space to help them market better and, direct bookings. Have you guys considered branching off in additional courses where it's more about the person that actually just wants to acquire their first property? Or is that teaching kind of oversaturated and not something you guys want to get into?
I think remaining focused right now, we have so much to do just with this that's a challenge. In fact, one of the things we did spin up is also a website development, call it agency, where, we've created basically a template that has all the things that any short-term rental would have, so that people could leverage that and get a lower cost direct booking website, which we did for a few reasons. We saw it as a potential as like another way to generate income and to solve a problem people had. But at the same time, it's also in its own right a lead magnet, because people buy that solution. Well, now they need to know how to market it. So there's already some different things, even in how we may partner on different products that are adjacent to our business. I think the one that you mentioned, Arden, like we know people in the space who are already doing that and set up and running. So I think for now, we'd be better off just affiliating with them, if that even made sense. The problem is we're connecting people at the end of not the end of the funnel, but the part of the funnel where they already have a property, if they're even engaging with us. So we just haven't built out that audience yet. I think the best way to do it is for us to continue to look at our audience, what problems they need to solve. And I think it might be easier to then, branch out into services like, we might build more of a model of actually some software to help on that marketing front, or this website thing that we had mentioned. Or we might, it's almost an easier pivot for us to eventually consider actually businesses and other places we might go there with some of the skills that we have than it might be to step into the very beginning of the process with the short-term rentals. But I think we're open to, where the problems are and how to tackle those. I don't know what you'd add to that, Kamille.
Yeah, I think just the natural evolution of the business will inform where we could scale to or pivot to. And I mean, it's already happening, even in the beta program, just kind of seeing where people, we did a little survey at the end and they're like, wow, I'm really interested in this area, even more so than this area. And we think, okay, well, maybe we should kind of build that out even more and make it a bit more robust in the program. But I think just as things grow and we see what's really sticking, what people are really gravitating towards, we could expand that part of the business and, pivot into different areas, or even, there's so many different parts of the short-term rental industry. So there are options just depending on how the business informs us along the way.
We spent this whole time talking about your business, but I'm just curious, talk about the short-term rental space. Where do you guys think the industry's headed?
I think direct bookings are very, very rapidly on the rise. I think Instagram is very rapidly on the rise as a source for finding Airbnbs and vacation rentals. I think it's changing so much. I mean, there was even a video, and we just did kind of a reaction video to this, but some girls, she's some travel influencer, and she said, hey, by the way, this is how you can find an Airbnb and save a little money. So you go on Airbnb, you take one of the photos from the listing, and then you put it into Google, and Google will search for that image, and it'll find if that listing has a direct booking site. And then you should just be booking through the direct booking site because you can save on fees. So I think guests are really warming to this idea. It used to be, 5 10, maybe even 5 years ago, when someone said, "Hey, do you want to book off platform?" It was kind of a sketchy thing, right? If anyone ever said that to me, I'm like, "Whoa, this is a scam. This is fake. Why is he asking for my credit card information?" It was kind of scary, but it's becoming more and more normalized, more and more mainstream. And I think it's picking up pretty quickly, especially because I think both hosts and guests are a little bit tired of Airbnb in a lot of ways. No one's really ever perfectly happy. And I have to say that my experience with direct booked guests versus my guests on Airbnb are vastly different. It's more personal. I'm not so stressed about the review or what Airbnb will not let me do or let me do. I mean, it's a different experience. It's more like hosting a friend. You're speaking with them. There's not this middleman where you're both kind of on your best behavior and you're both going to be reviewed at the end. And I mean, you can still get reviews, of course, on a direct booking site, but it's just a different experience. And it just doesn't really feel like Airbnb has your back, especially as a host. So I think just gaining more of that independence and making sure you have that up. So if people are searching for your direct booking site, they can find it. I think that's going to be more and more important.
And just to add a couple things on there, because Arden, you'll look for direct booking, right? When you find a property that you like and see if you could get it cheaper, or do you just ask them for discount?
Yeah. I mean, like as a customer, I'll use Airbnb as my search tool. And then when I see a property, the first thing I do is usually most of the Airbnb properties that I'm interested in. And I think this is a trend. And, Rob Abasolo and I were chatting about this on LinkedIn, where amenities are becoming more important. So I'm one of those guys that's maybe driving the trend. I want to rent an Airbnb where it's not something I can come even close to affording to buy. It's like living a fantasy for a few days. So most of these properties, the owners have given it a name. So then I'll just grab that name, search that name in Google, and in most cases it pops up. And I'll just, use that to... Now, I do... The one thing I will say is, and maybe this is me, it will evolve over time, I don't trust reviews on the direct booking site. Because I think, you can fudge them easily. So I still rely on reviews on Airbnb and VRBO. I ignore the reviews on direct booking site. But in this situation, those type of properties, most of them have good reviews.
And now that you say that, I'll actually show you. I'd be curious on the my direct booking website. It's literally an app that pulls in the review straight off of Airbnb. So you see the picture of the person in that. So I'd be curious if in that case you're like, oh, okay, because now it actually pulls that branding in. But you bring up a really good point there that I do think is the challenge some people still have to this degree with direct booking. Like, you made peace with it because you're like, yeah, I've done this and this works out. But there are, I think, still some people who feel more comfortable. It's back to the face thing in that with Airbnb, because Airbnb, in that case, that logo for them is a certain thing that people expect now, whereas sometimes going through a person on direct booking, they're not as comfortable with, which, back to the 5 years ago thing that Kamille mentioned. Well, ironically, we go back 10 years ago and there was, I think maybe 10 years, we'll say 15, there was no Airbnb, and you actually had to use services and find them out there. So it's just funny how we go through this cyclical nature. But I do think, answering that question, I think more direct bookings, I think it does come down to amenities and really unique stays. Like, people want to feel like, yeah, when they go there, that it's gone are the days, I think, of Airbnb where you can find a place that, like, and somebody can be successful when they're, I don't know, trying to think, if they have not newly remodeled places, like, these places I'm seeing now, and you've seen some of them too, I think, are like, they've got the nice overhead shots because they show that it's almost like you're staying in a resort. And I think you're going to see more and more of those, or like Rob did with these bachelorette kind of places. I know, somebody who's set up a horror themed place up near Kamille's, place in Big Bear. And even for her, she, like, one of the things we talk about in our program is around theming. And hers, it's definitely got this magical stargazing view. It's like a treehouse. It's not a treehouse, but, you could lean into the idea of just with the views and the way that you're up high. And then whereas for our property, the Red Hideaway, and it's got this farmhouse kind of feel, and we embrace that with the theming inside, and also just the way it's nestled in nature, because I think that's the other thing now is people are just looking for these experiences. And I think that's why, again, for us, we feel that the space we're in is so important now for people to stand out, because that's one thing. You could take the approach where people say, oh, I'll just go find it on Airbnb and they go back, but you still have to have the direct component side of it. And then at the same time, it's about channels. Like there's a risk to having a business where you're reliant on mainly one, which most people with Airbnb are. Sometimes VRBO comes in, but Airbnb is still better than, most booking platforms out there. They have, I think, more customers now than the other ones. But the risk for people who own the properties is that they're now reliant on that single person. And unfortunately, at times, Airbnb has been known to cancel people, not give them reason, struggle to get, a hold of anybody to do it. And there's just a lot of risk there. And just looking at it one more way is how many businesses out there, when you think about businesses in general, name any brand, and for them to mainly leverage one marketing channel, they just don't. That's too risky for their business. Most of them all have multiple ways that they will market. And that's basically what we're suggesting and trying to get businesses to do, because that's the only way to ensure your own safety in a world where there's a big giant conglomerate who's got so much control over your business, which is scary, even if in some ways they can be a good partner, but in other ways, you're beholden to them. And that's a big thing that drove us to jump into the space in the first place, is to help others who felt that same way and didn't like that sense of the unknown or helplessness around it.
I think it was a couple of days ago, Airbnb reported their quarter earnings, and the stock price dropped because they forecasted a softer kind of market. And I think they cited that it's starting to go back to like pre-pandemic travel levels, which was healthy, but not what's been happening recently. Are you guys seeing that in your own properties?
I mean, that's kind of what Kamille started with when she was mentioning a driver getting in this, is those days are gone. So I've seen it. And it's another driver of why we want one more source of customers coming in.
Yeah, I think it's another reason why just social media is so important right now, to have another way for people to find your property, another way to make it stand out, to look special, to theme it, however you want to do it, or even just being an expert in the area, building trust that way with people. But yeah, I mean, the numbers, people that were had those pre-pandemic, or like just when the pandemic was starting or during the pandemic, those numbers were amazing. And some people were really riding that wave, but they were inflated. The travel the people were just starved for travel, especially, and they were doing a lot of staycations and local travel. So I think, again, it goes to that risk too. It was a risk, but then you have to find a way to make sure it still works, even if the travel numbers are different. Now they're pre-pandemic. So, and I think, I don't know for sure, but I would assume that with Airbnb, it's the pre-pandemic numbers, but also there are more people that are booking directly. I know that they're trying to prevent that. They don't want that, obviously. They want everyone to book on their platform, but I think they'll need to work a little harder, especially with their customer service for guests, but mainly for hosts, in order to keep all of their hosts on there and to keep them loyal. Right now, there's not really any reason to be so loyal to their platform because they're just not treating you in that way. So,
and I think that's a good point, because there's a couple of ways to look at Airbnb's numbers. One, in general, supposedly June was the peak of kind of it feels like of new Airbnbs coming on the market. It's finally coming down a little bit again. So I think part of what, has happened along the way is you've got so many on the market and it's not as good as it used to be, that you have some owners who are like, you know what, maybe I don't want to be in this game. I'm going to go to a sometimes midterm rental, but oftentimes it's sell it, long-term rental, something else. Heck, I've known some people who are just like, we're just going to keep it as our own property because it was a little bit of a headache. So I think there is some of that component. And yes, I do think the other big component is that they're going to be losing people who start looking at just direct booking and other ways to be able to do it. Whether this happens or not, but I'm not sure, but there's some expectation out there that you might start seeing these companies start to show up that have their own portfolio of a certain type or style of property, like higher end. When I say higher end, it doesn't always have to mean they're just luxurious properties, but these unique stays and others, that then people might go there first. And if you look at what Airbnb has been doing recently, even on their homepage, they've got all these crazy collaborations and partnerships right now with like, I don't know. Sometimes there's celebrities involved. Sometimes it's the house from Barbie or whatever it is. And while on one hand, I think it's interesting, it's like they're losing touch with, I think, the hosts, and they have been for a while as they've been trying to really pull in all the people who are actually booking it. And there's just this risk of what they're doing to their business long term. Now, I think they're still going to be there, and I still think they have a good business, and I still look to Airbnb, but it's going to be really interesting because I think for people like us who have our properties and have alternate ways that we're looking to also bring in money, it's going to help us to stay more healthy than other businesses. And that's why I think you're going to see a lot of people get into this looking at, their own marketing and things like this, which is part of what we're, capitalizing on. But then at the same time, I also think that you're going to find that some people will exit the space, and that should hopefully help some of our numbers as well. But Airbnb's been playing the game of get as many people on the platform as possible, and that's been a double-edged sword for them.
As a customer, I appreciate that because, me being in Southern California, kind of the local, staycations are kind of coastal. It's going to the Palm Springs area or going to the Big Bear Arrowhead area. Well, before Airbnb, Palm Springs area and the Big Bear Arrowhead area, you would look at the properties, you're like, I don't want to stay in there. Like, it looks like a dirty old cabin. But Airbnb has forced a lot of properties to like up their game, and you're like, wow. Now so as a customer, I appreciate what they've done because they forced the market. I guess it was pretty good to be a general contractor in the last 10, 15 years. There's a lot of work. They're always busy. But I do appreciate that part of Airbnb where they forced properties to update and be really nice. I have so many properties just saved just because when I'm not sleeping, I like going through it. I love traveling. So it's like I'm either looking at resorts or I'm looking at Airbnb to just save for future.
They created a great platform for being able to highlight and show these properties, and because then by the nature of it, where you wanted to show up, you're competing in essence as an owner or as an operator to do so. And I think this is also why owner operators have are outranking a lot of the bigger property management company now, like Evolve and that, because they struggled to give that sort of level of both hosting service, but also there was somebody in between the property owner and them, so they just let the properties go and they weren't as involved in doing it. Which again, why I think some of these other companies that are popping up now are really interesting, because I think they're going to start pulling together and almost be like, we only let the best here, and then people like you are know to go and search there for the key sort of properties you want to stay at.
I've also seen an impact to the hotel industry because I feel like new resorts being built or resorts that are able to remodel are looking at saying, holy crap, these Airbnbs are offering a lot. What do we do? And a trend that I've seen happen in resorts, especially coastal resorts, is beachfront, plunge pool, walk to the sand. And I look at those, I'm like, forget Airbnb, I want that. So we're actually going to one of those in September because it's like, I love that concept of just waking up, here's my pool, take a step, I'm on the sand. And you pay a premium for it because the rest of the resorts, most of them that I look at, it's very, Mexico, Caribbean, but it's, I'm making it up, but maybe 200 rooms, but only 15 of them are on the beach. So you have to pay a premium for those rooms, but my God, they're just a different experience.
I think that's the other change that you will likely see. I know I'd love to do one of these and literally looked at something like that where I live. But the idea of these purposely built like resorts, but they're still a hybrid in between. So for example, there's a popular one,
Live Oak Lake.
Like that's a really good example where somebody built out here, this, it's only was 7 or 8 units, but like that's his push. And actually, I think he did a post on LinkedIn yesterday too, where he's like, it's not about going big. It's about going, actually high quality, small, where you really are able to maximize the product. So I think you'll see more of those things where people pop up with these mini resorts. Yeah, sort of thing. So, and they have some really cool ones at national parks where people have built like these things that you just feel like you're going to this really magical spot because they still are able to capture it and not just pack you in there. but you'll pay a little bit of a premium for that.
Yeah, I think it's even happening. I think it's almost more important now to create that unique stay and create that experience than the location itself. Like there's some properties, there's one in Ohio, in the middle of Ohio, and granted, I haven't really, explored Ohio very much, but it's this sort of remote area, but they've created, it looks like Tahiti. It's this infinity pool with waterfalls coming down. I mean, it's this incredible experience in Ohio, and it's wildly successful. So I think things like that, they're appealing more to people who do want that experience that they can't get at home. It's like gone are the days when you can just go visit a place and it looks just sort of like your house, but it's somewhere else. I think you're right that Airbnb, with just the sheer volume of properties on there, the influx, it has, pushed the expectations up. And I think it used to be people would have like a second home that they'd go visit sometimes. And then they're like, oh, maybe I should Airbnb this. So they'd grab all their old furniture from the garage or from the attic and they just kind of throw it in there. And you got all these log cabins with the, bare bedspreads and whatever, this whole thing. And people were getting a little bit tired of that. And now, there are a lot, the places are more modern. The hosting is more customized. It's, I know from experience with Big Bear specifically, there are so many very large management companies. And I didn't want to do that because I noticed that all the properties that are managed by the big companies, the reviews are significantly lower. And it's a numbers game, right? They have so many properties that your individual property doesn't really matter to them very much. So they're not going to put in the care. They're just kind of, phoning it in. Sure, they're going to try, but you can't give the same attention, to that volume of properties that you can if you're just hosting your own. So I think that's shifting too. There's a lot more owner-operated properties to help with the competition. So you're just seeing a lot of really great places now, and you can't really phone it in anymore as far as the decoration, the hosting, all of that. You have to really be pushing all the buttons, have it all your bases covered, the direct booking website, marketing, everything.
I've gone back and forth with Rob Abacello from Rob Bills. I'm like, Arizona property, as soon as you get a virtual golf set up in there, I'll be your first customer. Like, I want that. That's an amazing experience.
Yeah.
This has been a great conversation. Just being a fan of real estate and traveling, and then just the course business is fascinating. Hopefully one day I get into an Airbnb when Michael finds the right property for us. But where can people find you to either ask you about the course or ask you about just anything about the short-term rental industry?
I think right now, Instagram is the best way. We're on Instagram at stay_booked.co. We also have staybooked.net with a little information there that can also lead you back to our Instagram. But most of our communication and our resources and value is all being delivered through Instagram right now.
And most people know where to find Michael already.
Yeah.
Here he is.
Well, thank you again. I think, if anybody has any interesting questions or anything you want to ask, drop it in the comments below too, and we'll get Kamille and Michael to answer you. And thanks again, and we'll see everybody on the next one.
Thanks for having me on, Art.